Good morning. It is Thursday, right? Yeah, Thursday, October 16th. This is a joint session of the Education and Culture and Health and Human Services Committee. And we're here for the very important and near and dear to all of our hearts topic of early care and education. And we have three agenda items on the agenda today. Bill 2325, which is our early care and education coordinating entity designation. Bill 1125, which is the child care coordination amendments, and the early care and education coordinating entity designation. All three we will take votes on and act on today. Really appreciate the work that was done over the summer since we last met to come together and I think hopefully make a lot of our decision points go faster and easier today. And really happy to see the Department of Health and Human Services. Jennifer, glad to see you back. The Office of Management and Budget is here, the Children's Opportunity Alliance, and their newly minted board chair, Tiffany Jones, who I'm glad you were able to be here in person and not virtually, so thanks for coming. As I mentioned, we met last summer and discussed all these items initially. We'll go over that in a second and then get into the decisions. I would like to, just in a slightly different order, we're going to move the order a little bit. We're going to do number 2 on the agenda first, because I think that'll go quicker, and then we'll get into the other items. We can move forward and conquer and get more seats for our kids and make sure they are more affordable and we pay our teachers more, all the things we want to do. So I'll turn it over to Ms. Wellens on item 2 to get us started.
Great, thank you very much.
Oh, and before I say that, I'm joined by my colleague, Co-Chair Albernaz, who just wants to get into the meat of it, and we'll have more to say about that, but Ms. Wellens.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Co-Chair, and council members, good morning. Yes, so the first item, well, switching the order, the first item we're going to discuss is the Bill 1125 Child Care Coordination Amendments. As a reminder, this is the bill that would primarily as a kind of a housekeeping matter, eliminate the Child Care and Early Education Officer, the Early Childhood Coordinating Council, and generally amend the code related to child care and education. This bill was requested by the county executive in recognition of the fact that the early care, I don't know why I can't get these names right, Early Care and Education Coordinating Entity has largely taken over the duties of the ECCC, and also that the position we heard during the testimony and during the prior work session that the position of the Child Care and Early Education Officer is not being utilized and not needed due to reorganization. And so therefore, that's what this bill does. It's relatively straightforward. There was a lot of discussion during the July work session, kind of about the context and the background. The one update I wanted to share with the committee is that on page 5 of the staff memorandum, issue number 2, in terms of the Governor's Early Childhood Advisory Council, there was some discussion that the ECCC had been the local representative on the State Early Childhood Advisory Council. So update for the committee that since the prior work session, the designation has been now updated to reflect that the ECECE, the Children's Opportunity Alliance, is now the local designee, the LECAC, LECAC. And I don't know if there are any questions or further discussion.
No, that was the one outstanding issue that we asked, whether it sounds like that transfer has been made. We will still have representation. And as you mentioned, this bill would just eliminate those positions, do some cleanup. Any comments from colleagues on this? Any comments from anyone on the panel? Okay, so we have a recommendation to pass Bill 1125, the Child Care Coordination Amendments. All those in favor, please raise your hand. All right, that is unanimous of the Joint Committee. All right, we're cooking with gas. So let's go back to item 1. yeah, we're cooking with solar power.
I was going to say, yeah.
Aging myself. So we'll go back to item 1, and which is the Early Care and Education Coordinating Entity, Expedited Bill 2325. So are you doing that one as well, Ms. Willens?
Yes, thank
Okay.
you, Mr. Chair.
Let's get into it.
Okay, great. So this is Expedited Bill 2325, Early Care and Education Coordinating Entity. And as you'll recall, this is the bill to kind of update and clarify the duties and membership of the entity. And there was a lot of discussion, of course, during the first work session. And one critical follow-up item was the committee asking DHHS and COA to kind of collaborate and try to come up with any specific recommendations that they have regarding the language of the bill. So there is at Circle 204 of the staff packet a chart that was provided by COA that kind of consolidates both their comments and the comments of DHHS. So that's a good reference.
204, right? You said?
204.
Okay. Yeah, I see that. Just for folks following along, the millions watching at home.
Yes, yes.
220 of the PDF.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
There you go.
Thank you.
Yep.
So, and the other kind of update I wanted to draw to your attention is on page 7 of the staff memorandum. Item number 3 describes some supplemental information provided by COA regarding their contracts. Previously, they provided a lot of detailed information concerning their grant making in recent fiscal years. And on page 8 of the staff memorandum, you can see the list of contracts for FY25. So that's some additional background information for the committee about what COA has been doing. And it includes some monies toward the seat creation. And so that I wanted to provide that context. And then if it's okay with the chair, just jump forward to the start discussion of the decision points.
That would be great. Unless there's anything that, okay, by way of intro, yeah, I think we can jump in. I'll just say, before you do that, just to remind people, this is to clarify the intent of the original bill. Now that we've had a few years under our belt, the 2021 bill was, and some of us were here for that, and created this whole movement, and I think it was very ambitious, and we took strides and we made progress. I want to just thank both of you, everyone involved, for the progress that has been made to come to agreement on many, many items and to be working closely together. And also for really articulating the reasons, which we'll get into today, of disagreement and where you think, and that's important too. We have to know what, we have to get along and try to make sure we're moving in the right direction, but also really crystallize the reasons of why we think a different approach to get to the same goal is a better way. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So I just wanted to frame that. And yes, we can go into the decision points. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Mr. Chair. So at page 9 of the staff memorandum, we're at issue number 5, clarification of duties. And as you know, the original legislation provided that the entity would not be providing direct services. And due to some ambiguity in carrying that out, as the chair said, the idea was to try to, build on the experience and bring some clarification based on that. So the original bill deleted the term direct services and instead laid out specific activities that the entity would not be doing, which would include that they would not be providing early care and education, would not be awarding or funding grants, would not be entering into contracts with ECE providers, would not be providing goods or services to ECE providers, and would not fund ECE seats for individuals. And then, as you'll recall, council members Mink and Lukey had put forward an amendment, which is described on page 10 of the staff memorandum, to sort of modify the restrictions, in particular saying that the entity would not be providing early care and education, would not be awarding grants using public dollars, using funds from the county, and would not be funding ECE seats for individuals. However, the entity would still be permitted to enter into contracts, as needed with ECE providers, and provide goods or services to ECE providers. In terms of the feedback that the committee received from COA and HHS, you can see that feedback at Circle 211 of the staff report. I apologize, I'm not sure what the PDF number of that is. But there wasn't, total alignment on this issue. There was some agreement that some limited grant making, in particular for pilot programs, might be appropriate, which sort of dovetails into the Mink-Lukey amendment that, that grants would be permitted using non-public dollars.
211 is PDF 227.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And I would just note also there was a lot of discussion during the first work session regarding other boards, comparable entities within the county government and their ability to do grant making. It's not totally consistent. Some entities are restricted somewhat in their grant making, and others no restriction whatsoever. Regarding in particular the Collaboration Council, the local management board, the county law does restrict the ability of them to apply for certain grants over a threshold, but it doesn't govern the ability to award grants. So that just provides a little bit of extra context. Obviously, the committee can do whatever it feels is best for this entity. Thank you.
Great. So why don't we, Ms. Anais, you were not here last time we discussed this, so I kind of would like to hear from you on this point, like to hear from COA on this point, and then the sponsors of the amendments, if I'm sure they'll have, and other colleagues will have things to say as well. But why don't we start with just welcoming you back. Any thoughts you have on this issue, why you're either supportive of the bill language, or and what your thoughts are of this proposed amendment?
Great, thank you. Jennifer Arnaiz, Senior Administrator for Early Childhood Services, DHHS. So thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to provide a little bit of context. Over the summer, yes, I was not here for the first session and was able to watch the video, the recording. We held several meetings with COA to really delve into these amendments and to hear each other out about the whys behind it. From DHHS's perspective, I think we have come a long way from the last session in terms of understanding each other, in terms of where we are positioned with these amendments, specific to the grant making. DHHS does see the coordinating entity as a neutral convener who is working at the strategic level, very high level. And so looking at the system itself and looking at where those gaps exist, making recommendations, as well as analyzing how to move forward in this space so that we can make impactful changes. We also recognize that within the public agencies, it is our duty as a public good to be able to provide many of these services. So when it comes to the grant making, we are in agreement that yes, the Children's Opportunity Alliance, or the coordinating entity, has the ability to be able to identify gaps and to pilot projects that address those gaps. However, giving grants directly to providers is where we feel that it is not really addressing more of a strategic approach. Coordinating grant making with an organization or an alliance or an association to be more impactful throughout the county and really generate good data that helps inform how we move forward and addressing those gaps. So we are really looking for consensus on being able to be more strategic about how those grants are issued to the community, ensuring they do not duplicate existing services, that they are grounded in true needs from an assessment point of view, in a evaluative mode, that after grants, there's also a process of evaluation, what modality or methodology was used, and analyzing whether or not there was a true impact and what those changes are, and making recommendations how to elevate this really into the larger system, as well as recommending what agency could possibly take this or if it should stay in the community. So we see it as very comprehensive. So we'd like to have language that speaks to grants that is more at the level of a coordinated entity that is broad, that is strategic, and that is going to be impactful to the overall system.
I appreciate that. I'll hold on questions just so we can hear. Anything else from DHHS on this? No? Ms. Garibay?
Good morning. I'll just add that I think another aspect that we want to really hone in on is the sustainability piece. So really having a pilot that has done that can come over to HHS or some other entity that we can build into the overall budget and programming of the work that we do to ensure that the next fiscal year there's something in place for a pilot or a program that is sustainable. So that's it.
Appreciate that. Ms. Resnick.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Kimberly Rusnack, the Executive Director of the Children's Opportunity Alliance. So as the Children's Opportunity Alliance Board of Directors, as well as in partnership with HHS and MCPS, had conversations about the questions related to grant making, I think we definitely understand and agree that grants need to be time bound. They need to include evaluation. We need to think about sustainability and all of those pieces. And I think there is agreement that, there's innovation and nimbleness that we as COA can have, especially in regards to private philanthropic funds that allow us to do things faster or in a way that meets an immediate need. A good example of this is over the last year or two, we were working with the Maryland State Child Care Association and the Family Child Care Alliance of Maryland to provide the back office support and grant writing support for the community-based providers who are participating in the state-funded pre-K grant. So this year, for fiscal year 26, we are using private philanthropy to continue that work. Because we had initially hoped that the sustainability planning with that was that eventually it could flow into the shared services work with 20 Degrees. But since that was not able to work out for this year, we are using private philanthropic funds to be able to do that. So I think it demonstrates the importance of us being able to do grant making, being able to use the private philanthropic funds in a flexible way. And I think the other wording we put in there was, no limitations on how private philanthropic funds are spent, that those dollars are to be used flexible and in alignment with the common agenda. And so those are the key points that we have around this. And I think as we've talked with different philanthropic partners in the community, many of them have said we're kind of sitting back and waiting to see if COA will actually be able to push forward change in this system. And so I think it is written into our legislation that we are supposed to fundraise, we are supposed to bring in additional philanthropic funds to help support this sector and push it forward. So I think maintaining the flexibility of how those dollars can be used, as long as it is in alignment with the common agenda, I think is an important element that we would advocate for.
Just on the example you listed, the grantee was who?
The Maryland State Child Care Association.
That would seem to be consistent with what Ms. NIE said around, they agree that you should be able to do that grant. I just want to make sure I'm clear on that.
Yes, so there is
the disagreement
agreement.
is more about providers directly.
Right. So there is disagreement when it comes to whether or not we believe we should be able to fund or support providers directly. And I think the conversations we've had with many different child care programs, directors, and educators around the county is that they want to feel like they are part of the decision-making and implementation process, that they believe they are proximity experts and that they have an important role to play. And so they do not want to be excluded from being able to receive grants or funding to do innovative pieces in this work. In this system. I don't know if I could ask Tiffany to speak to that. She and I have had a lot of conversations about this, if you don't mind.
Sure, and I did want to make sure that I'm glad there's some agreement that kind of grant, because that grant seems super important, and I think everyone here agrees that you should be able to do that. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear. Yes, Ms. Jones.
I would just agree with what Kimberly just mentioned, but if Kimberly could give an example of providing funding to educators directly.
Yeah, so one example, just from looking at other communities and other different funders in this space. So for example, the Bainham Family Foundation, as part of their larger systems level work to really lift up and expand and support early care and education, they are funding 3 family child care providers that are in Montgomery County. and went to them with a question of, if you wanted to innovate and create the best possible space in your location, how would you do that? And so each of those family child care providers is able to take the Bain Family Foundation funds and do different things. They can hire an assistant. They can pay for summer care. They can pay for one of the educators has a lot of children in her school who have IEPs and are pre-K students, and they need additional support. So they are bringing in a language and occupational therapist to help in addition to what they get through the school system. So I think those are examples of where we see other philanthropic organizations and philanthropic partners thinking innovatively and creatively about how to support the ECE system. And so I think we just want to have, I don't know that that is the exact example or what we would do, but I think part of what we've also seen through that is it has empowered educators to see themselves differently. All three of those Montgomery County family child care providers are now involved with COA. Tiffany is one of them. She is our board chair. Another one is Lindalia Ventura, and she's on our family navigation group. Jen Nichols is another one of those family child care providers, and she's the co-chair of our COA steering committee. So what we also see is the ripple effect of investing in educators and programs directly. It empowers them to see themselves differently and to help them figure out how to join in with us in the advocacy work, in the systems change work, and in truly helping to push our early care and education system forward.
I appreciate that. I'm going to turn to colleagues. I'm going to start with Co-Chair Albornoz, then I'll turn to Council Members Mink and Lukey and Sales.
Thank you, Chair Jawando, and good morning. Good to see everybody, and welcome back, Ms. Sudnais. It's good to see you. And I have been given updates on the progress that we've made since our last session, and I do appreciate all of the continued work and collaboration. This is never going to be perfect, but I do appreciate just the thought that has gone into getting us where we are today. So it's hard not to have this conversation, or it's hard to have this conversation without thinking about the backdrop of what's happening nationally right now. And I think that I had an epiphany recently, because we've been through difficult challenges before. And during some of those especially difficult challenges, we did look creatively as a government at finding third-party funding sources wherever we could find them. And so it is important for us to be having this conversation right now, because one of the reasons why we established the entity was for it to be more nimble, not duplicate services, but also be flexible enough within reason to be creative in addressing challenges before us. And we certainly have our fair share right now. And I'll give you a specific example. Venture Philanthropy Partners, which sadly no longer exists, was one of the largest private giving foundations in the DC region for about 20 years. I'm familiar with them because I was working at the Latin American Youth Center when they gave one of their first system building grants. Now, VPP, as a matter of policy, did not contribute to local governments. They would not fund government. But what they would fund were public-private partnerships, but would exclusively give the funding for those partnerships through the private entity, the nonprofit entity. And so, and we're talking a lot of money at the time. So I think that there's general consensus in assuming the importance of giving COA the opportunity to be able to receive private philanthropic dollars. And we're going to need more of those, especially over the next 3 years, than we could have ever imagined. But of course, on the back end, making sure that we are coordinating and leveraging and ensuring that we're not unintentionally double dipping for organizations that are already receiving funds from the county, ensuring that there are clear parameters. So board members should, and their organizations, there needs to be a very important conversation internally about whether they're even eligible in receiving those internal funds. And that's just good governance. And there have been nonprofits that have gotten into trouble for that in the county in my lifetime. So it's something we have to be very careful of. And it's also important why, and we're going to have this conversation later, I think there needs to continue to be county representation on the board in a decision-making authority And we can adjust some of those numbers to make sure that the scales aren't tipped in any one direction any more than we intend them to be. But it will require on the back end consultation, conversation, coordination as those private philanthropic dollars come in. But I do have faith. I continue to have faith. And I have a lot of it because of all of you and what you have been able to do to get us to this point today. There's been a lot of heavy lifting, a lot of emotion. It's been challenging. But I honestly believe like we're in a better place today than we were even just a year ago. So at a high level, and we'll get into the specifics, I do believe that that COA should be given the opportunity within reason to be able to, not only secure private philanthropic dollars, but make investments in our community. But we have to make sure that it's done within reason. So just wanted to share those thoughts.
Thank you, Councilmember Habermas. Councilmember Lukey.
Thank you. And so my positions on these things haven't changed. That's probably not surprising to anyone. I do appreciate the work that has been done thus far, but even more so since we last had this conversation, we've seen greater impacts from federal challenges that are affecting education as a whole, but especially affecting our early child care situation. And MSDE is doing its level best to sort of iron things out. We've got a long haul ahead of us. And so I certainly appreciate COA as the neutral convener and the systems level work that needs to be done. I also do firmly believe that they have to have agility in those piloting programs, specifically because we are going to have continuing evolving crises, let's call it what it is, that layers additional complexities on the already challenged expansion of our early childhood education network. And so that's where I'm trying to figure out how best can we not overly tie the hands of one entity, respecting that duplicative work should not be done. I wholeheartedly get that. But to Kimberly and Tiffany's points related to our in-home, our family child care providers, we're going to see more of that. We need more of that, right? And so what might we need to do to serve those special populations who may be going to a family child care provider instead of a center? How do we make sure we're assessing and reassessing, which they can do, which they should be doing in conjunction with HHS, but to be flexible in a way that government directly sometimes can't be. And I would hate to see us unduly restrict what the early child, ECECE, oh, that acronym. I don't want to unduly restrict what they can do. And I also believe there is a firm separation between tax dollars, which could be used for pilots, which should have a notice of funding availability that sets the parameters that, of course, those folks who are seeking those grants are coming with a strategic plan of what they are going to do with it, like you mentioned with the pre-K students who had IEPs and adding a layered provider to see if that helps the situation work better. And but in terms of what they can or cannot do with their private raised philanthropic dollars, that's where I have a problem of the government doing some overreach on money that was given to the entity by private donors who may, when you donate, especially if you get a big fish donor, which, or an angel donor, which is wonderful in these times, may come with conditions that the donor wants to place on what that funding should and could be used for. And the donor is giving it to them as the nonprofit entity and saying, go forth and do this work I'm giving you the money to do. And for the government to go, oh, I don't think so. I don't think that's our role as a government to tell them no when that money was a bequest to them, donated to them to do expressly that work. And so that's where I'm trying to figure out, how do we draw the line here to make sure, or perhaps it's just in expressing this, my own legislative intent here, and if we are able to come to some consensus about how to be flexible on working on what the pilots could be, while separately allowing them to continue with non-tax dollars, do the work that they see fit to do to help aid in this space, and continue that collaboration and continue informing where the gaps are and doing the level of the coordinating entity, which in theory, if they're getting adequate private philanthropic dollars in, will help address some of those gaps, which is a win-win for everyone at the table. So could you all speak to that, or where you see that there could be a little bit of flexibility in there to allow for that, or whether the agency's position is still that the agency should, in fact, have oversight over their private philanthropic work?
I think on our end, the way we kind of approached it, and it's well written in the packet here, is we really view COA as a public serving body. And any funds, whether they be county funds or philanthropic funds, should work towards the goals of the overall public serving and in public serving our community. So in the example you provided, if they do get an angel donor that has a specific wish for how those funds should be used, and it's not in alignment with kind of what we've set out as a county, how we've coordinated collectively, that could raise an issue, right? That could raise issues of inequities, other issues that, those are things that we're trying to make sure are not a risk or an issue on our end. So I think for the philanthropic funds, we would still want some alignment, not necessarily county oversight, but to ensure that those funds are being used in an equitable way that push the overall agenda and overall county landscape forward.
So is there a way for you all to, when those situations arise, that COA would provide notice, you would provide feedback, and then they can do what they seek to do, but you've had your input? Or is it that you want an overall veto authority? Because those are two different things.
I would imagine, given the relationship that we've built so far with COA and over the past summer, that we would be given the opportunity to provide feedback.
Sure.
And that feedback would be received, and if changes needed to be made, we could work collectively to make that happen. We have the utmost trust in COA, and knowing that the work that they do will push forward the county's work and the overall county's agenda. So, I think in that situation, that would be ideal. Should the opposite occur and the feedback is taken and maybe changes aren't made, that's where we, could see some headbutting, but I don't imagine that would be the case.
Yeah, look, people have disagreements, and everybody has to end up working through them or agree to disagree. But what I'm asking is there a point at which, with respect to private philanthropic dollars, if you all are afforded the opportunity to weigh in, if it comes to a situation of we need to agree to disagree, that you're going to be okay with that, and that we're not going to come to a standstill and take 8 months to resolve what happens with money that was privately philanthropically donated and have council hearings about that. Because that's what I don't want. I'm okay with everybody keeping each other informed. Absolutely, you should be collaboratively working. Absolutely, COA should tell you this is the money that we were given, this is what the donor wants done with it. You get to say, I do or do not believe this fits within our policy agenda or our alignment. You've said your piece. They may or may not make adjustments. They may go back to the donor to say, hey, the county would like this. Are you amenable to that? The donor has the free will to say no. Should that money not go out into the universe to do good because of that? Or should we just agree to disagree? And that's what I'm trying to get at. Are you okay, if the situation arises where there isn't a consensus, to agree to disagree and let them go put that money out into the world to do the good work?
Can I make a comment?
Yes.
So I think this is me putting on my more like nonprofit 101 board hat of thinking of something like this. So there was somewhere it was mentioned in the packet, if somebody came to the Arts and Humanities Council and said, I'll give you $1 million, but I want you to do something related to the environment, right? That's mission drift, right? That's mission creep. That is not a donation that should be coming to the Arts and Humanities Council
Right.
because they are focused on arts. They are not focused on this other thing, right? So when we are out talking to individual philanthropic donors in our community and wherever they are from, we are talking about our mission and what we believe in, and that we are working on focusing on this early care and education system and all of the different elements and pieces in it. So if we are seeking a donation to support this work, it is connected to that. So the wording we put in here was that there's alignment with the common agenda, right? If that gift is coming in and helping to advance the common agenda, then we should be able to say, yay, go forward, right? For example, a couple weeks ago, I had a conversation with a donor, and somehow it came up as they were looking at our family navigation. One of the pieces on there is coming up with a central website or resource place where families who have kids 0 to 5 can go there and find everything, right? They see that we have basics. They see that we have Imagination Library. They see that this is where you go to locate to find childcare. Jen and I talked about this yesterday in our one-on-one check-in, like, wouldn't it be great? And honestly, that donor even said, if you could do this in 6 months, that would be great. I am a dad I have kids who are 0 to 5. I understand how difficult this is, and this is something we need now, right?
Right.
So in that example, it is in alignment with the common agenda. It is connected to the work we are doing collectively together. And I informed her and said, this is, maybe going to happen. And so, yes, we're going to add that to our work, and that's how we are going to proceed. So I think to what I heard you say, Lori, if when funds come in, if there are specific restrictions on it that we believe need to be raised either to our partners at HHS or to our board to say, is this truly in alignment with the work of the common agenda? It is upon me as the executive director to do that due process, right? To talk to our partners, to talk to the board. And if there is disagreement, then I would say it goes to a board conversation, and I defer to my chair and say, we've got an opportunity to access these dollars. These are the stipulations of it. There's concern from our partners. What do we as a board think is right? Do we accept these funds, yay or nay, right? And that's how I would handle it in terms of if that calms people's concerns about philanthropic dollars coming and asking us to do something out in left field, right?
Right. And I think, and thank you for raising the board's role, important, and that HHS sits on the board too. And so that is the body that could review both the concerns, the donors ask, have the full discussion, and decide what should be done, right? So are you amenable to that, where COA would notify HHS, you would be able to raise the concerns that would then go to the board, and the board would sort out whether it met the common agenda or not?
Yeah, I want you to answer her question, but I just will say the board, I've had conversations with Ms. Resnick about the board's role being a little less management of daily activities and more overall oversight board kind of thing. So I think we just need to understand the context of that too in this hypothetical.
Sure. But I mean, like, I know that, like, at least on nonprofit, you use the Arts and Humanities Council, and arts boards are they're my bailiwick. And if there was and have been angel donors who want a specific thing done, the board makes that decision about whether that fits in, whether that's a gift we could receive, because it might have been something bigger than what we could tackle, right? They might have had grand plans, but the donation size versus the vision were not a match, and we needed to roundtable that and make sure we were going to be both fiscally and operationally responsible, right? But that was the board's job at our 5 times a year meeting. So we weren't convening constantly. 100%, the board should not have to get in the nitty gritty of day-to-day operations at all. So if you could comment on that and where we could find that, again, that consensus, because that would be a great place for us to help land.
So I think, for my purpose, let me reframe this. We are firmly grounded in that the coordinating entity is working at a systems level change. And so with grant making and distribution of those dollars, it should be to the larger community in a transparent, equitable manner that really starts to inform how we create those systems change. So in the scenarios that we've heard, while I appreciate the scenario about Bainham, right? That is a random, very different approaches to trying things out. But I would question, how does that inform the system? And how do we uplift that? So any grants that come in, if COA pursues outside dollars and donors, I would say that those would have to be used towards that bigger system again. And if they're going to be released in grant mechanisms, again, it is done through an organization or an alliance. An alliance, I think, is a loose term also for a group of people that you've done a strategic way of being able to disseminate those dollars to really impact the system, gather the information so that we can see change. And then, as I said before, it's also about elevating, it's rooted in that collaboration. It's rooted in us having, is it scalable? Testing theories out. Is it scalable? What does that look like? Making those recommendations based on sound data. So, I feel like we're having two different conversations. That one is about, can COA receive money? Yes. How is that money going to be used? Again, through the broader responsibility of the coordinating entity. And under legislation, they were created specifically to look at our systems and create systems change.
Well, they were designated to do that work. They existed as a nonprofit entity. The name changed. But
Okay.
well, then answer me this. In your corporate documents with the state of Maryland to create a nonprofit entity, are you a DBA as Children's Opportunity Alliance, or did you create a separate nonprofit entity for purposes of the ECECE?
So I'd have to go back and look, but I'm pretty sure we were created as the Children's Opportunity Alliance. I don't think it says anything in our state level documents that we were created as the Early Care and Education Coordinating Entity.
No. I mean, COA had a different name before, right?
Well, so it was a project housed at the Greater Washington Community Foundation called the Children's Opportunity Fund.
Right. And so is there anything that designates COA as a corporate entity of itself for purposes of the state of Maryland? And were you the Children's Opportunity Fund now doing business as COA?
No.
So how do you do your...
Our taxes are Children's Opportunity Alliance. We were created as an independent nonprofit. Kevin Beverly and I filled out the paperwork in February of, 21 or 22? Yeah.
So you did the paperwork after the legislation passed creating the ECECE?
Before. We did the paperwork before with the understanding that that was coming.
Okay.
Could I just a note, Ms. Rodriguez-Hernandez helpfully pointed out to me that in the Articles of Incorporation for the entity, they are incorporated for the purpose of serving as the county's early care and education coordinating entity,
Right.
responsible for monitoring, et cetera.
So that matters. That has significance in terms of whether you have a separate nonprofit authority, separate and apart from this county entity as the ECECE. So thank you for that. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to turn to Councilmember Mink and then Councilmember Sales, and the goal here is to try to land the plane somewhere, but we'll see where other colleagues are, and we'll see where we are. Councilmember Mink.
It's great to hear the points of agreement, which are many more than they were previously. So I thank everybody here for the diligent work on that. Obviously, we all have the same end goal at heart, and that's evident in that work. And on the question of the funding and where it goes and how it's spent, in particular, so it sounds like everybody is in agreement. I'll just say it again because we enjoy the points of agreement. Everybody's in agreement on the philanthropic dollars being able to come in and that being really critically important. And the question is on how that should be able to be how the philanthropic dollars should be able to be spent. I think that the point has been made by colleagues that I very much agree with, that given the, given the moment that we're in with the federal government, that it is critically important for us to be able to use philanthropic dollars from wherever we can get them in order to support critical services like early childhood education. So I think we must start from a point of being very, very cautious about any limitations that we might put in that area. I think that's going to be very hard to explain to the public moving forward as we continue to lose access to more federal funds for work like this, why we have restricted ourselves in legislation. I think the conversations happening at the board level are important, and I know that those will continue. But once we put something in legislation, that becomes obviously a much bigger barrier if we would seek to undo that. So, starting from a place of being very cautious and being very hesitant about what limitations we write in around the expenditure of privately raised philanthropic dollars on this important work. I want to be really cautious. And in the flag that I'm seeing is, it sounds like everybody's in agreement with kind of the idea that these dollars should go towards systems building, and the idea that these dollars should go towards piloting programs and piloting initiatives and piloting things. Would that be accurate? There's agreement on those ideas. Okay, great. So I think that it sounds like then that the point of disagreement would be on what does that mean? What does that look like on the ground? And I'm hearing that it would be making grants for pilot programs would mean that it should only be going to the larger community, to an alliance or association, something like larger systems level scale is one proposal. It's an HHS proposal, as opposed to going to potentially individual childcare providers. My confusion about that is that generally my understanding of piloting something would be that you want to pilot on a small scale. That allows for the nimbleness and the flexibility, and we don't want to roll out something large generally until we've seen how it looks on a small scale. That's my understanding of the meaning of piloting something. So when MCPS is piloting something, it's only going to be in a small handful of schools. They're not going to do something across the whole system. They're going to try something. Ideally, is what we want them to do, and then generally it is what they do. They're going to pilot something in sometimes only one school. Sometimes it's only being done in one school. A principal or community members have come together and they've put together a program. We see it in one school, and then it works so well that now it starts to get built into the broader system. Sometimes it's MCPS themselves, and they're putting a pilot in place in a small handful of schools, and then they come back, and then in the next operating budget, they've asked for funding to be able to expand that, larger and larger and larger as we see the success. So I think the example that Kimberly, that you gave around the Beta Foundation funding being used for those 3 programs, specifically to do that, to pilot specific initiatives with these 3 childcare providers, is an example of exactly that type of work, where we're going to see how well it works, and then that provides data and can help inform whether HHS, the county, whether there would want to be funding for expanding that or not, based on that evidence. Am I understanding correctly the purpose of that? And is that time bound?
The Bainham example, more.
Our grant is time bound, but it has been renewed for another year.
Okay, so it allows the collection of data a year at a time, or I guess we could say, in order to see and then we could use that data to inform whether we might want to invest maybe public dollars towards that work to expand that work. To me, that's a definition of a pilot, and that's exactly what I would want to see some of these philanthropic dollars going towards. And I don't know if HHS has can explain to me more why that would not be considered a pilot, or why we would want to prevent the pilot of an initiative within, one or two childcare providers? I'm confused.
Sure. So I think on our end, pilots definitely are small. Where our concern would be is what providers are being selected to be part of the pilot. Is there an equal opportunity across different types of providers to be a part of the pilot? So when we're talking about funding for smaller providers, there are a lot of providers who would want to be a part of that. And what is the process that COA, the systematic way that they're choosing who's part of their pilot? Or is there a different way that they're choosing what childcare providers are being part? So we would want things outlined and have kind of an open, equal opportunity for various childcare providers to apply to be a part of the pilot as well. And right now, I think that's where there's a gray area. There's not really clarity on who's being chosen to receive the funding or be part of pilot programming.
So to me, that sounds like a different conversation. That sounds like a conversation about grant reviews and how that is happening, which I wouldn't typically see in legislation, as opposed to the question of whether they're able to give to individual providers versus the alliance or association question. So is HHS's perspective that that those programs could be piloted with funding going to individual providers as opposed to just alliances or associations, as long as there is a particular method to the selection of which provider? Am I understanding that correctly?
So, no. So what we're saying is that by selecting a few here and there, it is not going to be a systems level impact. It does generate some data, but by using organizations or alliances, groups that are already formed, you can strategically go around the county and look at small models, large models, or centers, small centers, family home-based, center-based, faith-based, nonprofits. There is a selection that would inform, right, how to move forward and how to make it scalable. Again, the purpose from our perspective for the coordinating entity is to look at that the barriers that exist, and then how do we change that? How do we make something so that it can be broad scale for everyone and really benefit and improve our entire ECE system? So, picking here and there is disjointed. It's not sustainable. And it's not really scalable. We need certain mechanisms in there, and Organization Alliance gives you more of that framework to be able to put out those grants so that you can get a wider, cast a wider net to your community and be able to gather individuals who are going to inform them for the larger systems change.
Sorry, yes.
And I guess what I would say is I think to this, I think there's a couple different things I think about. So with any pilot or initiative that you might be implementing, there might be subpopulations or subgroups that you want to target in and focus on, because the strategy that might work for family child care might not work for centers, might not work for certain parts of Montgomery County, up county versus down county, right? So I think there are different distinctions or parameters you might put around a pilot based upon whatever it is you're trying to achieve. And so I think, one of the other pieces that our child care educators raised to us was if we're not allowed to provide services or funding directly to educators, all of this last year or two when we did community listening sessions, we had child care providers coming in and providing care while we were having meetings. So does that mean, if it's written into our legislation that we can't provide goods or services to providers, that how do we then pay child care providers to come in for those meetings? But I think the question of scale and whether things feel random or not, and the selection process, I agree. It has to be open and transparent. It has to be clear what are the reasons why we are picking an organization, whether that be an association or alliance we are working with, or the educators and the child care programs we are working with specifically. When we started the pre-K expansion community-based work, we put that information out to every single association, every single organization. And in the end, we got less than 10 child care programs that came to us and said, we're interested and we want to learn more, right? So even sometimes when you put things out at scale to everybody, to the full community, you don't necessarily get larger numbers that are interested in doing this because it is new, it is innovative, it's taking a risk. And so I think just to be mindful of that as we move forward, I think I think even when you start with 5 or 10 or 3, it is still strategic. It still can be intentional with what you're doing and what you're learning from it, and then it continues to grow. So I just, with everything you guys have said, I think I go back to what you talked about, Councilmember Alvarez, from the beginning of the VPP example. So that's connected to the Social Innovation Fund, where I was a program officer, because VPP was one of my grantees. So that is the lens of how I see this, that COA is an intermediary, and we are not providing direct service, but the innovation and the funding that we are giving is helping us to learn and expand and grow. And it is informing the system, even if it is only 1 center or 3 childcare centers or 20 childcare centers who are participating in the Shared Service Alliance right now with 20 degrees, right? You have to start small and with people who are interested in that innovation, and then reach that tipping point where it starts to be able to scale.
Thank you. And sorry, I think that all makes sense. I want to make sure that I agree with you, Mr. Nuss, that when we're able to make it broader, when we're able to do an alliance, or when we're able to cover a group as you described, that there are certainly benefits there. We're not always going to be able to do that. We're not always going to have as many people opt in. There's not always going to be enough funding. There are opportunities sometimes to fund pilot programs that are in individual childcare with an individual childcare provider, just like MCPS has opportunities sometimes to pilot programs within individual MCPS schools. And we absolutely we benefit. Not only is there a benefit to the families being served there and the providers who are keeping their doors open at that time, for that year, for that time-bound period of time, and we heard from them directly about those benefits. But there's certainly also data and information that comes out of that we can learn from, that can help decide whether to expand the work from there. Maybe the next expansion is to an alliance or an association, but there's certainly information comes out of that while there are community members and providers who are benefiting from that. I did find the public hearing very compelling, where we heard many testimonies from families, from marginalized communities, from folks who had been served by this work directly, who were strongly asking to make sure that we did not do anything that would block that work happening that had so tangibly impacted them, especially if it's being funded by private dollars. And we also heard from providers who had directly been impacted by that. And what's so remarkable about this is that work is happening while it is providing information that we can use towards our systems building, by having the funding being time bound, ensuring that it is a pilot program. It's always nice when a pilot program can be larger, but that doesn't always make sense. It doesn't always work. And I don't think that it's appropriate for us to be putting blocks on private dollars that would prevent us from doing that work. I do think that the compromise that is suggested by the Children's Opportunity Alliance for this does strike an appropriate balance here, in noting that they can administer grants to associations and alliances or early care and education providers for pilot programs, as long as they are time-bound. They include evaluation and sustainability planning, and it results in recommendations on how to improve the ECE system moving forward when the funds are from the non-departmental account, which is managed through the contract. I think that really does cover the conversation that we've had today. I think it does cover the concerns that have been raised. And I think it's also important, as the text goes on, that it's specifically noted that the dollars, these private philanthropic dollars, may be used flexibly in alignment with a common agenda. And I think it makes a lot of sense to include that language because, to the concerns that were raised earlier about whether those dollars would go towards the goal that we've all agreed upon, that language is in there, and at the same time we make sure that there are not that we're not putting in place blockades to some of the important work that we're being done. So I would suggest that we move forward, if not with the original amendment, then I would suggest that we move forward with that compromise wording proposed by the Children's Opportunity Alliance. In fact, I'm going to move that we adopt the Children's Opportunity Alliance's suggested wording.
Can I?
Yeah.
Sorry to interject, but just can I ask the council member if you would be willing to couch the motion with the caveat that we could still do some wordsmithing. And I also would just suggest from the perspective of that some of these terms are, of course, open to interpretation, and it might be beneficial to say explicitly like that it's a pilot program in the determination of the board, for example. That way, kind of to Councilmember Lukey's earlier point, there's a little more finality there of how it's being viewed instead of a back and forth between different parties.
Absolutely. I think that is happy to amend my motion.
And I would ask, you're welcome, of course, to make a motion. I was hoping to get through hear what everyone had to say, and then turn to motions because maybe. But if you want to make a motion, you can. I just think it might be good to hear Councilmember Sales.
Oh, absolutely want to hear, of course.
And then,
I want to open it to discussion.
And then we can,
yes.
And I'm happy to come back to it. I won't get you out of line with that. But and then I know Councilmember Roberts, and I haven't really said much yet.
Certainly not intending to block conversation, of course.
Yeah, and
move us directly to a vote, but I just want to
always
make sure that that's the motion on the table.
Yeah, you can make that motion if you like.
Okay.
And there's a second from Councilmember Lukey.
But definitely want to hear from Councilmember Sales, absolutely open to wordsmithing, and appreciate all that.
All right. Councilmember Sales.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to my colleagues for this important discussion all about how we can boost educational experiences and outcomes for our earliest learners, especially those benefiting from these different program settings, from the family, daycares, the faith communities, small, large, commercial versus home. At the end of the day, we want to ensure that whatever is working is amplified and expanding, and what is not working is ending. And so, we've all worked in nonprofit settings. We've all worked on boards. We've all understood that there are ad hoc committees, and sometimes committees make recommendations to the full board. Some people have to deliberate decisions more deeply who are closely associated with the decision making. But at the end of the day, I think all of our missions align. And so I have seen how we have come from, polarizing opposites to now so much consensus has been built over this past year because we care about our kids, and there's a lot of money at stake. The money's shrinking. We have a lot of kids that are, already on a wait list for early childhood education classes because of the scholarship dollars that are on hold at the state level. And so now we have an opportunity to raise private funds to support educating our youngest learners. And so how is this money going to be used, and how is it going to be applied to meet our mission of educating our children? And I believe that both of these entities have, great experience working with our providers, working with our donors. But at the end of the day, because you all are so uniquely intertwined, I think it's crucial that new ideas and approaches are discussed and evaluated through the board. We have a responsibility to provide oversight on the outcomes of how things are done, and especially how tax dollars are expended to our community. And I think, Councilmember Lutke and Mink have offered a compromising path forward to allow, COA to use private and philanthropic funds to for grants and temporary contracts, but the structure is missing. Do you want us to decide that structure, or are you all capable of creating a structure that could work? You know, there's limited funds. It's not always going to be the same amount of funds, but if there is an agreed upon approach of we're going to fund these kinds of programs, we're going to ensure that these types of settings are you know, done. We have these metrics that we are going to be evaluating for any recipients of these funds. You know, we can do that for you, but that's really not what, you know, our job is, you know, and you all are very capable of, you know, we entrusted you to manage these funds through the county and as a coordinating entity. And so, I mean, that's one of my first questions. Are you able to come up with a structured approach of how these philanthropic dollars can be evaluated and disseminated to the community with our oversight of understanding what the overall impact is, and are we still meeting our mission? And I'd like to hear from both.
So yes, I believe Children's Opportunity Alliance, with our staff and our board, we can work to figure out what are those metrics and determine those plans for moving forward. So far, only during our first year did we provide an open grant round of funding. And with that, we provided funds for 4 different community-based organizations that all had different projects and intentions, because at that time we didn't have our foundational action plan, we didn't have our common agenda. So those 4 grants were not necessarily tied to any specific strategy. Okay. But now that we have those pieces in place, moving forward, yes, we can do that and tie those outcomes or work plans of the potential grantees to the work that is being done and the strategy that is set with the common agenda.
Okay, thank you.
So I was just conferring with my chief. So keep in mind that the dollars that are allocated for the coordinating entity are submitted through a contractual process. Mm-hmm. And so what we see on that budget are specific to the dollars that the public dollars that are given to them and how those are utilized, what the line items are. Mm-hmm. As board members, we do know the larger landscape because there is a review monthly and there's a fiscal subcommittee, right? So we see the larger pieces of it. But in terms of currently, because of the contract process, we only see the dollars that are allocated from public funds. We don't see the philanthropic dollars on that budget.
Oh, that's a problem. Why is that information not shared between both committees? So there's a full understanding of how much resources are available.
On a monthly basis with our finance committee, we share our budget to actuals and our organizational financial documents. Currently, our HHS contract largely pays for our staff salaries. That is what is the majority of our contract funding for HHS. So when they look at the monthly financials, our dollars are merged, right? We do not have, at the top you have our revenue, and it shows where those revenue dollars are coming in. Okay. And then our monthly, whatever expenses we have incurred for that month or for the 3 months of that fiscal year. But as you're looking at the expenditures, we are not separating out whether those expenditures are coming from or on county dollars or NCPS dollars or private philanthropic dollars. And that's typical practice for a nonprofit organization.
But this isn't a typical nonprofit. This is a quasi-judicial. It's a county. You're getting county funds. You're getting private funds. And so that needs to be transparent in the deliberations of how decisions are being made when you are making decisions with a county organization and with taxpayer funds. So I think that's, I think
I mean,
that's a
we can
normal-
raise it with the finance committee. We can talk about it with the board. This is the first time this has ever come up that we are not being as transparent as we should be about private philanthropic funds. I mean, for the first year, because the county contracts are also reimbursement basis. So when we are paying our staff on a monthly basis, we're not necessarily using those county dollars because we don't have the county dollars to use. So I think there's also some churn and cycle of cash flow that's not always entirely clear until a month or two after things have happened. And so we can definitely raise this and have further conversations with our finance committee and board so
Yeah.
there's greater transparency around the county dollars versus the private philanthropic funds. I know in our first year, or maybe it was the second year, we largely only spent county dollars because of cash flow, and we weren't sure. There were limitations on what we could do, and so we did have some private philanthropic funds that were raised for general operating that we did not spend. Because also I think the other piece with philanthropic funds is they're not necessarily always on the same fiscal year timeline that county dollars are on. So one of our first grants we got was a 2-year grant from the Marriott Family Foundation. So we had 2 years to spend on those dollars. So there's different time horizons and requirements that are connected to all of the different funds.
Yeah, that's for, whoever your fiscal operator is. I think it's helpful to understand what money is going to be used for these pilot initiatives, these one-offs, or maybe something that could potentially be expanded. And then what's being used for with our, taxpayer funds. I don't think that's, a big ask, but, we want consensus in the decisions and how programs are supported. We want to ensure that they are meeting, a joint mission, because if something is working and we want it to be expanded, we want to make sure that there's consensus and everyone is full speed ahead in support of this, because we've seen it work. It matches our mission. We've seen the benefits. We've seen the results. And this is what's going to work at the end of the day, because, as I mentioned, and as, Councilmember Alberno shared, we're in very dangerous times, and money is becoming scarce. So the better, it's just an opportunity for you all to have more oversight into how money is spent. You all are on the front lines of these programs, and so I just want to ensure that there is consensus to creating an internal system to evaluate this and having an understanding of what money's coming in, from where, and how it's being allocated to the communities, and how it's being evaluated for its effectiveness.
And as our contract monitors, they monitor our contract and those specific dollars, right? That is their role as HHS holding our contract. But as board members, they see the organizational financials, right? And so that's a different role, although they're there on that board because of the role they have in HHS, right? But so there's a different reporting mechanism, and it's the same for MCPS, right? We don't send MCPS our monthly financials as an organization. We send them how we're spending their dollars. So I think there's a distinction there, but yes, we can definitely work on greater transparency with the board so that they understand the different pots of money and how and where they're being spent.
All right. I just think that this is an opportunity to compromise on groundbreaking, innovative pilot initiatives and still have fiscal oversight on how all of these different pots of money are being spent. Thank you.
I appreciate those comments and the comments of all my colleagues. I think because the motion that is on the floor right now is related to, I'm going to try to make sure we all understand it, but a part of it is that the board, let me start from the beginning. The first that we would all, the motion would be, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that let me just state what the effect of the motion would be, and then we can get to the language. That you would be allowed to use philanthropic dollars to grant to organizations for pilots, things that are aligned with the common agenda. We have to think about that language, but in alignment with the common agenda, but that there would need to be board approval. Now, this is what I'm hearing, but we can talk about this, that of those grants. And that's one option, you know, because, and I think when I'm hearing Councilmember Sales and when I'm hearing Councilmember Lukey, and so that's why I just want to make sure we're clear on this. We're going to get to the next question of what the board looks like, right? It could impact this as well. But I'm hearing, and I also will say, just for my view, my whole goal here has been, it's we're dealing with the grant issue, but what we're really dealing with is, do we believe that the grant is going to be in alignment with what we've said we want to do? That's the real conversation. Even though we're talking about this, we're really talking about this. In that, are we in alignment that this is going to benefit the early child care and education system in Montgomery County? And that's an open question, right? Just like with any initiative or grant, some people could say yes, it does, or some people could say yes, it doesn't, or no, it doesn't. And so there needs to be an internal mechanism that's not the council, that the board can, in the leadership, are in agreement that the activities of COA are moving the system forward. And that would include anything you're doing, including philanthropic dollars. You know, because I'm in this situation. I want you to get as much money as you can to move the system forward. You know, when Councilmember Alvarez and I partnered on MoCo Boost, you know, I went out and got almost $2 million from $1 million from one individual. So speak about an angel investor who had specific things they wanted to see happen, and their only requirement was that they wanted the money to go directly in people's pockets, right? Not be used for administrative costs, right? So we were able to segregate their money to do that. And then we got money from foundations like the Meyer Foundation and others. And then we put in a ton of public money to provide those funds. And so we wouldn't have been able to do the program if we didn't get that. So I want you all to go out and do that personally. And I think everyone here is saying that they want that. So that's good. The question is the pilot or the grant in alignment with the system's goals? And there could be disagreement on that. And so the question is, when there is, or if there is disagreement, I don't want there to be, I want there to be alignment, but if there is, what's the mechanism by which you all determine whether that's allowable? And I think what I heard from Councilmember Lukey and what I heard from Councilmember Sales, but again, you guys can correct me, is that there should be a board involvement to create that alignment. Right? And so I'm comfortable with that. I think it's a compromise. It's further than we were. It's not you can't do it at all. It's that the board has to agree. And then we'll get to the question of who's on the board, which I know is relevant to this. But so my goal is that you all are in alignment. I think of like you'll know this, Kimberly, when we did the Investing in Innovation Fund, the I3 fund in the Department of Education, when I was there, and there were three levels. There were like, you really know what you're doing. There's a moderate level, and then there's a kind of a just getting started. You're demonstrating level, and the grants were smaller depending on those levels. But you still have to report back like how it was impacting. And I do think there's a role for innovation in every system. But I think the key thing is that there's alignment in that we think this is something that's worth investing in. So I want to let you respond both, and then I'll turn back to my colleagues, the sponsor of the motion.
Yeah, I want to be clear on what the motion is.
Yeah, I want to be clear on the motion. Yeah. But could you just respond to what I've raised, which may or may not be the motion that we have, but the issue of the board having to agree that this was in alignment with the common agenda
So I think
for philanthropic dollars that come in.
So I'm thinking on my feet here. So
Sure.
I think I hear the concern. I think what our current policies state is that the board has to vote on any expenditure or single contract that's over $60K. So this last year, when we provided the contracts to Goddard, Minds in Motion, and I'm forgetting the third. When we did those contracts that were 100,000 or more contracts, those were all voted on and approved by our board because our financial policies stipulate that an expense of that amount has to be approved by the board.
Is that an internal policy?
That is an internal policy that we have set as an organization. Okay. What I think gets a bit more sticky or unclear with grants or pilots, and what my concern is it makes us less nimble if we have to go and have conversations at the board level, because right now we're trying to move our board to meeting only 5 times a year, which then if there's something that comes up and it truly is innovative and it needs to happen quickly, is the timing aligned with when our board will meet, or do we call an emergency board meeting to then be able to get everybody there, and is everybody informed enough to be able to make a decision? Is my question or concern, or is there a role that the executive committee could play in helping to?
Is there who could play?
Our executive committee, which is our board leadership, our chair, vice chair, secretary, and treasurer, for them to be able to get together and make a quick vote or conversation on it.
Of the HHS folks on that?
No. So none of our government partners who are on our board have stepped up to be in any of those leadership positions. But I think the other piece, and this is just thinking of grants or pilots that are happening this year and how it could impact. So I know we've talked about the Methodist Church example, that there are some churches who have come to us and said, we want to participate in pre-K expansion, but we don't understand how. So trying to work with them to figure that out. That's a pilot. One of the other pilots is the Community Ambassador Program. We are partnering with CHEER and included a grant request in there, enough Maryland State grant to fund the Community Ambassadors pilot with CHEER this year. We've not had a board level conversation about that, but I'm just thinking through immediate ones this year and how that would impact it. It just would slow us down. It's not, that's my major concern, but we could have those conversations at the board level and then have a vote, right? And it's written in our bylaws, I think it's majority, right? So depending on how the vote would land, then that would make the decision.
So it's possible. Miss Wellens.
Right. Just to note that if you were to, in the statute, give the board the authority to decide, oh, this grant aligns with the common agenda, this one doesn't. I mean, that is a duty that could be delegated to the, executive director or a subcommittee. That they could do that. The board could do that.
Yeah.
If the frequency of meetings is.
So we could say
the
board decides, and then they can delegate that authority among themselves with the right people. Could be a mix, some sort of new committee. Could be a grants committee. You could do anything like that. HHS,
Yeah. So I have as I'm hearing this, right. And so this is just Jennifer thinking in real time. Is the responsibility for oversight really within DHHS? And hear me out as to why. There is a duty, right, to county residents on how these dollars are being spent. And I think that we should have the ability to come back to council, right, and explain how these dollars are being utilized and in alignment with the common agenda or the strategic plan.
Certainly during budget time or hearings that we have, absolutely. But we don't want to be micromanaging grants.
Correct. But there are times in the year where I think that's important. So I question where the oversight of those dollars really needs to land. And I don't, no, we are not part of any of the fiscal committees. The executive committee. We do sit on the fiscal committee, and both Deborah Lambert from OMB and myself. But I'm just trying to figure out, in terms of those dollars that come in, ensuring that it really is moving forward in the county. And I think that there has to be a way that we should be able to come back to council during budget season and explain sort of where we are with these dollars and how they're being utilized.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm just wondering where that oversight is happening.
Well, I think it would happen in the budget process, like when we sat with your budget and said, how are you spending the money? We went, we would want to see a holistic picture of how COA is spending their money too. because obviously they do receive county dollars as well, and they are the designated entity. And I think today we'll continue that. I would suspect in the next item. So I just think what we're trying to set up is a way that you all internally at the board can have agreement, because you have a couple levels of check, right? One is like, this is the strategic direction of what we want COA to be doing, which I think there's large agreement around. Then there's, okay, how are we going to implement that in this year or this quarter or this, and part of that implementation could be Ms. Resnick and her team and her board, they think we should provide these grants to create an opportunity for innovation with churches that like you just said, there's an expansion opportunity. And then you all have a discussion and you agree, like kind of high level, all right, that's a great strategy to pursue. They might not have the money yet. They might have to go out and get it. Or so maybe you agree at the big, as a board, like these are the things we want to go after. Now, of course, there can always be a curveball. Someone can come in and say, we want to do X, Y, and Z. But again, it has to go back to what are we saying we're going to do? And then on the specific grant, what we're talking about now is there would be the board itself or some subcommittee of the board that would determine, okay, do we agree that this is in alignment with what we've said we want to do this year? And that decision would be made before the money is accepted and before there's a decision to move forward. That's kind of what we're talking about, I think. All right, let me turn to the motion maker, then to Councilmember Alvarez, then to Councilmember Lukey as the seconder. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Councilmember May.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want, I think that the conversation is a good one, and a lot of that makes sense. And also a lot of that is quite in the weeds, and I think is appropriate to not have that level of detail in the legislation, that this is a board level conversation for you all to figure out and then let us know. But I think we are in agreement certainly on the purpose of those conversations, and which is written into the suggested wording, which I cited as my motion, which is on Circle 211 or PDF page 227, the suggested wording from COA, which as I noted, I think strikes a nice compromise. And with, I'm going to come back to Ms. Wellens in a second, because you had, I think, some wordsmithing to help us out there. But again, noting that within that suggested wording, it says that those philanthropic funds may be used flexibly in alignment with the common agenda, as long as there is coordination between partners related to how these private philanthropic investments are used to address ECE systems changes. And I'm hearing also that there already is a voting system that is already part of the process for the higher dollar grant amounts. And you could think about if and when it makes sense, and there is capacity amongst folks to do that for lower dollar amounts potentially. But noting also, I know we've had conversations before about the fact that it's not like most of the people on the board they're using their time, they're not salaried to be participating in this, and thus it's hard to get everybody except for our government folks. So it's hard to get everybody together, and we don't want to create undue burdens for little, very low dollar amounts that would do a great deal of good, and be able to provide some of that pilot level data that we're looking for. We certainly don't want to be adding red tape in the legislation. I would think that it makes a lot of sense for those conversations to be where they, as we have discussed at the board level. So the motion is for that suggested wording plus Ms. Wellens.
Right. I was and unfortunately, I don't think I can do the thorough wordsmithing from the panel, but just to note that your motion would be flexible enough that we could, without making substantive alterations, clarify the language. And also there was the addition that the determination of, the determination is ultimately the board's. Yeah, that's the one. That's kind of the key. That's not in the language. And
right. That's the part that I want to make sure that we don't write. I don't want to write into the legislation at what dollar amount a board vote is required. I think that would be a substantive change that I don't agree with, to write a board vote into the language. I think the conversations about what the process and procedures is for determining if it's in alignment with the common agenda is a conversation to be had at the board level, as opposed to writing it into the legislation.
Well, can I just ask the sponsor or the motion maker, as I read this, and Ms. Mullins can chime in, that there would not need to be a vote under this language. It says as long as there's coordination. Coordination could be just having a conversation, sending them the information.
Right.
So that's a
Right.
kind of a core issue. If we want there to be a board action, regardless of how they figure out how they do it, I do think we would need to put it in here. If we don't want there to be board action, I think this could, as I read this, COA would just need to kind of notify and have communication with, which they would do, with the larger board, but they could still move forward.
Right, yeah, my intent would be to, not require a board vote for a $5,000 award when they're only meeting maybe a handful of times a year. So I think that,
But you
right.
also don't want to set a threshold, you're saying.
Or they already have a threshold that they are using. Yeah.
Sure, Councilmember Lukey.
Gonna try here.
And
Try
then
my
I'm
best.
definitely going to my co-chair.
So I think I totally understand what my colleague is saying. I don't want to put a dollar threshold in because I'm not saying that the board would need to approve a dollar amount. I do believe the board needs to approve or at least have an affirmative vote on the fact that the project, the thing, matches the common agenda so that we can put that piece of that to bed, but not about, so then thereafter people would apply, you would dole out the funds, et cetera, et cetera. The board wouldn't need to approve that piece of it, but the board should approve whether the project matches the common agenda. Does that make sense?
I'm hearing differences
No.
from the motion
Okay.
maker and the second, so we need to decide that, otherwise it's not
Yeah.
going to be a valid motion.
And also, Mr. Chair, if I could just clarify, we're talking about private dollars only, correct?
Private dollars.
Is part of
Correct.
the motion that public dollars would not be used for
Correct.
grants? I don't know if that.
Well, I mean, I thought we were talking about private dollars.
Private
That was my
dollars.
understanding. Yeah, it says
Private
Yeah, it says
dollars.
it's private
Yeah.
dollars in the
Yeah, the
language.
public dollars would not be used to make grants.
At all,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
So just to note, just something real quick to note in this, that if those philanthropic dollars are outside of the contract, then I'm thinking about the implication to your staffing, your budget, because the contract is specific to those public dollars. So that work would be outside of that contract. But there is language in the legislation also about advocacy. So I'm trying to figure out how to blend this together in a way that is actually functional, that this doesn't harm us as we're putting it into implementation.
Okay.
So that my concern is how much work is going to be leveraged on these philanthropic dollars and these grant making that could potentially harm you on the other side, where we're using the public dollars for predominantly staffing.
I'm not.
So
yeah,
your
could you
budget,
restate that?
the budget right now, right, for the coordinating entity, right, the majority of it is going towards staffing.
For HHS.
Yes.
Yes.
HHS we're funneling the dollars through that contract to COA, and the majority of those dollars are going towards staffing. But if you are now looking at work and leveraging grant making with philanthropic dollars outside of those county dollars, how is that going to impact the actual staffing time that you are allocating in the budget for HHS?
So if I'm understanding your question, your concern is that by spending time raising private philanthropic dollars or giving grants, that we are using the staff time, say my time, that is charged to the HHS contract to do the grant making and not to doing advocacy.
I think we'd be
the other-
acknowledging, I'm going to answer that for you. I think we'd be acknowledging by giving the authority that that's an okay use of her time. So if we're saying you can use philanthropic dollars, you obviously have to be able to get the philanthropic dollars, but it has to be in alignment. The way the board would control that, to the point that we're talking about, is like whether we say that this is a good use of time
Okay,
or effort.
so we're in
anyway.
agreement that will be
Well, we're not in.
appropriate use.
I think
Well,
there's a
that's the
majority. It
proposal.
seems like that might be in
Okay.
agreement, but there needs to be clarity of whether
Correct.
the motion maker is
Rephrase.
okay with that portion of it, as there's the person who seconded, Councilmember Lukey. That's what I need to ask you, and then I'm going to Councilmember Brown.
Can you say the language again?
So it would be this language that's in there with some wordsmithing from council staff, but that they would be able to use, COA would be able to use philanthropic dollars flexibly in alignment with the common agenda as long as there is approval by the board, and that it's being used to address ECE systems changes, something like that, something to that effect. Not coordination. So I think the change would be the coordination between partners. I think it would need to be more specific in saying some sort of board approval. Ms. Wellens, is
Right.
that?
Well, my thought was that, substantively, it would basically be, the private dollars may be used flexibly in alignment with the common agenda in the board's determination,
Yes.
as long as
great.
there's coordination between
That's
parties.
simpler.
So that it's not, you don't, my thought was that you wouldn't necessarily need the vote that way, but if there wasn't a vote, then the board would have delegated that
Right.
responsibility.
The board can figure it out. That gives them the opportunity to figure
a little
out
more
amongst
flexibility.
themselves how that authority is utilized. If they want to do a vote, you can. If you want to delegate it to a committee, probably smarter, you can figure that out. So are you good with that?
Yeah, I think,
Okay.
sorry, go
Yeah,
ahead.
so I just wanted to clarify. So you're changing the wording to the philanthropic wording section, but the other top section where it says in response to the entity's systems building mission, the entity may administer grants to associations and alliances or early care and education providers for pilot programs. So you're keeping in the wording related to early care and education providers
Correct.
being able to receive and participate in those pilot programs.
And that was also language that was included in the DHHS.
Ours did not have these.
Except it left out providers.
We left
Right.
out providers.
Right, you left
Ours
out
is
pro- right.
organizations, alliances, and associations.
Got it. Yeah, but we're saying for the private dollars, you can keep that in.
Okay, so you're saying with private dollars, we can keep in the early care and education providers piece, but with HHS county dollars, we could not support early care and education providers. Is that the distinction being made or not?
The language that I've moved is the COA suggested wording on circle 211. The only amendment that we're talking about is to that last paragraph, because we're all in agreement that we want those dollars to go toward the common agenda. And the question is, how do we make sure that's happening? And my concern is about making sure that we're not putting undue burdens or creating, too much red tape that's going to slow all of the work down. So I think that's where that's the only
so are you
tweak to the
moving
language there.
the 1, 2, and 3?
Yes.
The 1, 2. So another big difference here is in response to the entity's system building mission, the entity may administer grants to associations and alliances, and then this is the difference, or early care and education providers for pilot programs as long as they are time-bound, include evaluation and sustainability planning, and results in recommendations on how to improve the ECE system moving forward when the funds are from the non-departmental account, which is managed through the contract held by DHHS. So part of this motion that you're making would allow you to use DHHS, i.e. the same county money, for grants to providers. Now, I want to make sure colleagues are clear. I don't think we would want to have less accountability for the county dollars than we do the private dollars. So what I am envisioning is that I'd be okay with that if all of it was subject to this board action, both private and public.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I just wanted to point out, if this is for the limited activities with respect to public dollars, if this is subject to a contract with DHHS, I would think that the contract would then dictate, which could get back into some of the, areas of disagreement that have occurred previously, but it would have to be subject to the contract, right? So I don't know.
Well, if we tell them that the contract should,
So the idea is the contract would provide that grants could be made using the dollars with as
board-
long as the board makes the determination that they're pilot programs that are time bound, et
that's
cetera.
one thing we could do. That's, I think, what the motion is.
Okay.
made. The other thing we could do is we could say no, only private dollars can be used to subgrant and with board approval, which is, I think, maybe what HHS would prefer, but we should discuss that. So, I think what we were discussing in landing around was, can private dollars be used subject to the board approval, whatever process you set up, to grant? I think you're hearing a general consensus, yes. All right, so assuming that, let's park that for a second. On the prior point, can public dollars be used to grant with the same board approval I'm assuming folks have a view on that. DHHS, you probably say no, or I don't want to assume. What's your thought?
There's like 5,000 things going on in my mind right now. I'm trying to keep track of. So I would say we are in agreement that county dollars should not be used for the pilot funds. That's fine. Philanthropic dollars, if that's where we're going, we could be okay with that as long as there is clarity and coordination among the two bodies. But also want to be very clear too that whatever work is being done towards philanthropic dollars, that does not take away from the work that they should be doing as part of the entity. And I know we can say that that is what they should be doing as part of the entity, but just want to be very clear that we don't go down a slippery slope of COA becoming something that they were not really designed to become in the first place.
All right, I'm turning to Councilmember Alvarez. I'll come back on the motion, but Councilmember Alvarez has been very patient.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, few points, and just to uplift a few things that have already been said. But just to go back to the origin story here, COA was never intended to be sort of a middle go-between foundation. It was not intended to just be another conduit for us to get funds into nonprofit organizations. It was always much more intentional about creating this entity, and I know that's a nebulous term, but that looks at the system as a whole, is a little bit more nimble, and can make recommendations for changes at the policy level, both at the county and state level. Because we didn't really have an entity like that prior to the development of COA. And I am concerned, have been concerned, have shared this concern with Ms. Rusnick. All of us have had experience on boards of nonprofit organizations that do some level of grant funding at some point, and that does take a lot of time, and it does take you further into the weeds. And I've always been concerned that that may deviate, at least in some way, from the overall mission. Because as amazing as your team is, Ms. Rusnick, there are only so many of you that can do so many things. And so if this takes our eye off of the ball in any way, then I'm reluctant. I've been persuaded by you and the board and the wonderful testimony that we've heard that the grant-making ability is critical to be able to inform those systems. And you learn things through this grant-making process and in talking to providers that you may not have otherwise known. I mean, I get that. But there has to be a reasonable boundary placed. And so I am comfortable, I'm not at all comfortable with the public dollars, but I am comfortable with the private sector dollars, foundation dollars, as related to the motion, provided that there is some language, and it doesn't have to be board approval. It could be a committee, a subcommittee, but that we do be more specific when we talk about coordination and be reasonable about it. We want to be nimble, but we also want to make sure that there is that check-in opportunity. And I'll note just a couple of other things. So there will be multiple touch points with this body moving forward for this entity. The most year over year will be the budget. So this conversation is going to be revisited every year and to see how things are going and how the system is being impacted, hopefully positively. But there's also the designation of COA as the entity. Like that will be a recurring thing that this body, and so there will always be synergy between the council and the board. And that was another reason why we wanted to come back to this legislation to get these things resolved, as difficult and complicated and as messy as it is, to make it easier for you all to be able to move forward. So I guess at a high level, I agree in principle with the motion, provided we do add some clarity on the language on what we talk about in coordination, but I will not support anything related to public dollars.
Okay, so back to the motion maker. So I think you've heard from everybody. Do you want to amend your motion?
I would like to ask Ms. Mullins a clarifying
Absolutely.
question. So as written on the public dollars paragraph, which concludes, which is managed through the contract held by DHHS. As written, does HHS currently have the ability to limit COA's ability to spend those public dollars on, for example, early care and education providers for pilot programs through their contract?
I mean, I would say as written, it's saying that this would all be subject to the contract managed by DHHS. To me, that would arguably give a veto for DHHS on the shaping how these grants would be, with the caveat that, as we were discussing, this could be reworded such that you would provide that determinations of the grant making are exclusively the boards. I mean, it would be hard to do that because
I don't know how we
saying
could
that this is
have let the
public-
board
this is
overrule
public funds.
HHS.
Yeah.
So I don't think we can, right? And I'm not suggesting that. I just want to be clear that as it's written, HHS would have, as it's written within the amendment currently in regards to the public funds, HHS would have the ability. So I'm on Circle 211 PDF, page 227, under COA suggested wording, next to number 2, limited activities. So as written, my understanding is that HHS would have the ability to prevent the entity, COA, from administering grants of those public dollars to early care and education providers for pilot programs, which I understand is the desire of.
Right,
But I would suggest that is going to potentially lead to contractual disputes.
That's the problem.
How to come up with the contract to begin with. If DHHS says, no, we don't want you to do grants, and the entity says, no, we can do it, look at the legislation, you have to put it in our contract. And then also just like then the implementation of figuring out, okay, well, what is a pilot program? What isn't? And that would have to be a deliberation between the two entities in a contractual way that I just wanted to caution that could.
Yeah, I want to make sure that
bubble
we
up.
have clarity here. And I think that the intent that we've agreed on is to walk away with the ability to block the use of public dollars, if that's what is the desire, for some of these particular programs, but maintain flexibility with the philanthropic dollars. Am I understanding that correctly, Ms.? Okay.
Well, can I ask a question just to throw another curveball or wrench into this? What about Montgomery County Public Schools funding? So we have talked very clearly about HHS funding, and we've talked about private philanthropy. Our contract with MCPS allows us to do grants, allows us to do pilots, does not have any limitations on whether those grants go to nonprofits or childcare providers or educators or childcare programs. So just want to think about where those.
I don't think this would impact
it. Wouldn't.
that.
Okay.
Because we've got one paragraph here that's about the public dollars that's coming through HHS, which would allow, like it or not, which would allow HHS to put limits on whether or not COA can use those funds for grants to early care and education providers, only with those dollars that are managed through the HHS fund. Please correct me if I'm misunderstanding this, Ms. Wellens.
Right. I mean, this kind of goes back to my point where I would just appreciate some flexibility on the wordsmithing, because I don't think that we should, for example, put non-departmental account in the code.
Right.
I mean,
I agree
that's
with that.
kind of getting into
Agreed
the
on
weeds.
that.
That doesn't make sense. Just, from the process perspective.
I agree.
Even saying it's managed by DHHS, I mean, I assume that there's not going to be any change to who the county executive wants managing these contracts. But I mean, just to note that does kind of limit the ability somewhat of, constraining this, putting it solidly with DHHS. I don't know where else it would go, but-
Could you leave it as DHHS or as otherwise designated by the county executive to give future flexibility on that? And then just as we're talking through this contractual issue, again, MCPS, it's a contract. They specify what you can or cannot do with that. That is that scope of work. At DHHS, any funds appropriated to DHHS that go through to COA, they can modify, change, amend, whatever, their contract with you to see fit as they choose to do. But DHHS does not have the authority to undo or modify MCPS's contract, right? So everybody's got their own contractual relationship. We don't want to impair that, and we are not. But we did want to take care of the private philanthropic dollars because that's outside these different entity contracts, and that's the point of the motion.
Yeah. Okay. So I think maybe we're in agreement.
I'm gonna try to restate.
The limited activities the first paragraph in regards to the public funds with HHS, that HHS should maintain their ability to, prevent the use of those public funds towards grants to early care and education providers for pilot programs should they want to, and in other ways that are written into their contract. And that there are not those limitations on the private philanthropic funds, which can be used flexibly in alignment with the common agenda. And we're going to have some wordsmithed language there that that brings the board into the conversation there, but that is not going to necessarily mandate that the entire board is convened. That's going to allow some flexibility because we know that the board members are not meeting regularly on it, every other week or whatever. So
yeah, I just want to be super clear on to the point that Ms. Wellens brought up. I would not be interested in creating a conflict at this point of contract. Right. So if I want to change I want to make the language so that there is agreement. If public dollars, so I think we need to do one of two things. Just say that we don't want public dollars being used for grant making to providers, or we need to subject those public dollars to the same board requirement that we're subjecting the private dollars to. I think we need to do, in my view, you need to do, or maybe there's a third way. But
Mr. Chair, I would say the third way is say, DHHS is the final word on the, if DHHS, basically giving DHHS the flexibility if you want to contract with COA to do these grants, great.
Well, what I'm trying to avoid
in the
is
private
just
dollars would be the board.
Yeah, yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
we don't
sorry.
have the board over DHHS. But what I'm trying to avoid is the timing of, okay, COA goes out and gets someone excited to make a contribution, and then they come to DHHS, let's say on the public dollar side. Like, let's say, or I'm sorry, let me rephrase. Let's say COA has an idea to use public dollars to grant in something they think is 100% in alignment. They think it's a great idea. It could be, it's probably going to be a great idea. And they come to DHHS and say, here's what we want to do. I just want, before that we get to the contract, and I guess this would be, in that initial conversation, you'd either say yeah, we agree with that or we don't. And then if they don't, it's not going to happen.
Well, then you need private philanthropy.
Yeah, and if it doesn't, and then you get private dollars, then that's the board process. So I guess that we would avoid that would be the conversation, right? That would happen. Okay. So yeah, so then if the language, so just so everyone's clear, so we're going to go with, you're going to change that language, remove the non-departmental account, and we're going to get something that says, in substance, that they can use, they're allowed to use government dollars to grant with DHHS approval, correct? Okay. And they're also allowed to get philanthropic dollars to grant with board approval. Now, the board, that can be a subcommittee of the board. You guys figure out how. It can be a delegated authority of the board, but the board has to be in agreement with that.
So can I clarify? So the element of being able to provide grants to early care and education providers or educators for those pilot programs, it would not be possible under government HHS dollars, but it would be possible under private philanthropic
Well, it would be possible
dollars.
if they agree.
If they agree.
And I'm hoping there is a case. I just want to state
Okay.
my intention. My whole thing is I want you all to agree. I want DHHS to be open to the idea. I don't want you to interpret this as don't even ask them.
Okay.
I think you guys should work together
Which
to the
we
level.
are. We got to that agreement.
Yeah.
With organizations, alliances, and
Yeah,
associations.
and so there could be.
But so we're leaving the language of grant to association and alliances, but we're not leaving the language for early care and education.
No, we can leave
providers.
the
We
language
are.
in there.
Okay.
Still
Now,
subject to
I'm
HHS.
pushing you. I'm
Okay.
saying to you here, and I think you're hearing, be open to. I know you didn't put that language forward, but be open to that. They could have an idea of something that is a grant, that is an alignment. What would be perfect in my world if you'd be like, yeah, I really think that's a good idea. Let's put even more money. Let's put some of our money into it and do it because we think it's a scalable thing. So, but they will ultimately have the authority to say no on the government dollars, and then the board or some designee of the board would have the say on the private dollars. Is that clear? Okay, and are you good with that motion? Yes. And are you good with the second? Okay. So I think we have a motion and second of at least the intent. Ms. Wellens, are you clear?
I'm clear. Just wanted to point out, because you mentioned associations and alliances, that's just another area in which, again, I would not obviously change the substance of what what you're deciding. But I don't like the term associations or alliances. That's kind of vague to me. So
Agreed.
Yeah. So just another example of like,
And
as we
because I
clarify
don't
the
think we
language.
even really need it, because right now we're saying
right.
the possibility is for it to grant to anyone as long as it's in service of the mission, and that the DHS agrees and that the board agrees. So, all right. So we have a motion and a second on some language that we at least expressed our desire that will be put in a packet when we get to full council. Everyone in agreement, please raise your hand. All right, that's unanimous. Great. All right. Now we're on the next item.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr.
Now, who
Chair.
gets to
And-
decide?
No, that's awesome. But before fully moving on to the next item, just wanted to note, so the Mink and Lukey amendment that's on page 10 of the staff memorandum, excuse me, so you've resolved the grant issue. So I just wanted to pose the question of the ability to enter into contracts, provide goods or services. I wasn't sure if you all wanted to make a decision.
Oh, I think
On
we
that.
said no on that, right? On the goods and service. Well, let me.
That's what the motion is, or sorry, the motion that's in the packet.
You're where? Which page are we on?
I'm on page 10 of the packet.
Okay.
The council members Lutke and Mink had, originally at the last work session put forward the amendment adjusting the bill's restrictions against what ECE would do and entering into contracts and providing goods or services. The proposal was to take those out of the restrictions. In other words, that contracts and goods and services would be permitted.
So did what we just
Right?
what we did doesn't makes that moot now, or what? Let me let you speak to it, Councilwoman.
I think I think that what we just did basically replaces that, if I'm understanding. Yeah, I think what we just did replaces that. It wouldn't make sense to have both.
So we don't
So
need
we
that.
probably don't need
Right.
subsection K.
We're replacing it with the new K, which is
Oh,
Right.
okay. So I thought, but are you still then retaining that
Oh, the prohibition. Okay,
the prohibitions that you can't
bill,
provide ECE, you can't?
No, I think we would remove
fund
that
seats.
portion because we're not providing. So hold on. So currently in the bill it says the entity must not provide direct services or deliver programs for early childhood education.
Correct.
No, that's the current legislation.
That's current legislation.
The
current
bill
law.
says the entity
That would stay.
must not provide ECE. Oh, so you're saying that would stay?
I would think so.
No,
Well, hold on. What-
no,
okay, hold on.
because if we left the existing K, let's call it original K, what's there now, before we
Yeah, we
take
would
action
remove-
on this
yeah,
bill,
yeah.
then technically that could be in conflict with use of private philanthropic dollars, should the board decide that use of those dollars in that way
Right, okay.
fits the common agenda. So we
Got
can't
it.
leave it as is
No, we
in
can't.
original K.
So I think
need
we
a
can
different
keep
thing.
K1. You're not going to provide. No one's suggesting that you provide direct ECE.
well, they have. So that's also part of the issue.
Go ahead.
So
Not
the way
providing
we
this.
have defined providing early care and education is we are not a child care program.
Right.
Right.
So we've always stuck to that is not something we intend
Correct.
to do and
Right.
have never done.
So I think it will be 2, 3, and 4, and 5 that are removed. And then what we did, because I don't think, you're not advocating to become an ECE provider.
Can I clarify? Sorry.
Okay, that's just how I'm reading it. And then 2, the restrictions on awarding grants, entering contracts with ECE providers, or providing goods or services to ECE providers, that would not remain because we just said the new language.
I think that we're in agreement with the intent. Certainly, the issue with the language, I think, is that there has been disagreement between COA and HHS about what providing ECE
Correct.
means, because COA has maintained that they have never acted as a ECE provider,
Right.
and HHS has taken issue with some of the ways that they have spent their funds, which were not in being a child. Anyway, I think that has been a lot of the back and forth. and that I would really love to avoid dealing with like ever again. So I think that the language that we just discussed, which lays out how the funds can be spent, does a sufficient job of covering those bounds. And so I think that it is appropriate to remove that line.
Councilor Alvarez, do you have any view on this?
Need to phone a friend here. Ms. Wellens, do you agree with that comment, or is it still too gray?
The only modification I would say is that, I think a lot of the areas of disagreement have revolved around what do direct services mean. But Councilmember Mink is right too. I guess you could say that the delivery of programs could also potentially be ambiguous. I mean, I honestly think that that's more of just the policy call. I don't think there should be confusion about providing ECE, but there also doesn't seem, that's not really consistent with their mission of being a child care provider.
Right.
So, I mean, you could probably take it out.
Ask HHS, do you all have any view on this? I mean, I think what we've described in the previous action lays out how they can spend their funds for outside entities. So what would be the reason to keep this language?
Sorry, this is getting very...
Yeah, basically, they don't intend to grant to become a child care provider themselves, and then we've already laid out the terms with which they can provide funding to child care providers in the previous action, right? Is that?
And there would be oversight by DHHS on that.
Yes,
So
on
I think
that.
I think it does wipe this one out then.
Now, the only one I would say is, let me just so we're clear, because I don't want to come back and have an argument. The fund ECE seats or the provision of ECE to individuals. COA,
No.
the funding ECE seats or provision of the ECE to individuals, which was a restriction here. How do you see that in the context of what we've already decided? Do you see that as something separate or subject to that? Because I don't want to. What I don't want to do is get anyone being too cute here and trying to do something.
No, I hear what you're saying. So you're asking if the language that we just approved, that is the language we want to move forward in the new version of the legislation, if we would believe that funding ECE seats would be included in if we gave grants to early care and education providers.
Because I don't know how else you would fund them, but I don't. Yeah.
So like,
give me an example. You funded some seats with the money you had last year.
Well, so we funded seats with HHS dollars last year.
Right.
I think. Sorry, I'm trying to think of how to. So if we go to the example of the Bainham example, right, of how they're funding the family child care programs, those dollars are not necessarily given to fund seats. They are given to support the child care program and business, and it is up to that educator or leader of the organization to determine how those dollars are used. So in some cases, they might have used them for summer care because they didn't have dollars for summer care. Do I consider that funding seats? No, I don't, because the child's there and they just need the buffer to get them over the summer because right now there's no other option for that. But those dollars could also be used for the special education services that I talked about too. So
there's a distinction without a difference here, because I'm just trying to see, is there a reason that we would need to keep any of this language? Because if you're going to grant to an ECE provider, for example, there's going to be a contract between you and that ECE provider, correct? So one of the provisions here says you can't enter into a contract. So we don't obviously need that because we've covered the circumstances with which you can do that.
Right.
Subject to HHS approval with government money, subject to board approval with private money.
Right. And so I don't think it's necessary to have that other additional language. One other question I have just in thinking about, and I know my opinion of the difference between grants and contracts is different than some others' opinions or beliefs about grants and
No,
contracts.
that's why we should get it out right now.
So
Yeah.
with what we put forward as the wording, and I think that was part of this wording as well in the amendment put forward by Albornoz and Jawando, was we're talking about grants, but grants are essentially contracts. So are we saying those interchangeably in terms of wording, or there needs to be a
Ms.
distinction
Wellens?
in the?
I don't know how you
Right.
have a grant
It's-
without a contract.
It sounds like the way this is evolving is that, really the language that would be adopted would be regarding use of funds. Not,
Okay,
so
so
I don't
then it
think the
doesn't
term
matter.
Then it would make this irrelevant.
contract
Okay,
or grant
I like
should
that
be
better.
used.
Let's do
Okay.
use of funds.
Okay.
Great. That's great. That's great.
Okay, thank you.
So then we can remove this and just go with use of funds for the other one. Great. Now we can go
We're
on to the
good.
board
I
composition.
understand it, and I will write it down. I will write the amendment immediately after this work session. so
Sounds
that
good. Thank you so much.
It is memorialized.
And please share that with committee members. And
Will do.
And then we will talk about it when we vote on the bill at full session, just to make sure everyone's 1,000% clear. Okay. So now to board composition.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And so, and a couple of, I think, straightforward items before board composition, just we're at page 11, item number 6. There is an amendment regarding the focus on racial equity, social justice, the focus on eliminating systemic racism, and also indicating that the body is a neutral convener of ECE stakeholders. This amendment was proposed by Councilmembers Swink and Lukey and has the support of COA and DHHS. So this might be a
Thank you.
straightforward one.
Yes, with that, without objection, and thank you for finessing that and working together on that. Yeah.
And one more example of that is item number 7, page 12 of the staff memorandum. The amendment proposed by Lukey and Mink to that the entity will engage, educate, and build public awareness about the importance of high-quality ECE programs. There's also alignment with the stakeholders on that.
Absolutely, without objection. All right.
And then the next issue, we're going on to page 13, issue number 8, dealing with the identification of what low income means, essentially, both with regard to having members of the board who are low income, and then also making recommendations for equitable access for children whose parents are guardians, who are coming from a low income family, and how to describe that, because in the bill, low income is originally introduced. The bill changed low income to, basically described it as meaning those who qualify for a government benefit based upon income. There's a lot of discussion at the first work session about that and the stability of government benefits. There is amendment by council members Lukey and Mink to define low income basically as the individuals whose households earn no more than 80% of the area median income adjusted for family size. And then there is another option provided by COA and DHHS to use the self-sufficiency standard per the Community Action Agency of Montgomery County. And I'll just also spitting on a lot of info here. At the bottom of page 13, beginning of page 14, there were a couple of council staff questions regarding the self-sufficiency standard that you may or may not want to get into. Those are the options.
Okay. Well, let me just have you two explain, because you agree on the self-sufficiency standard. Just tell us why, and then I'll turn to Council Co-Chair Albornoz, and then Councilor Lukey, and anyone else who has a comment on it.
So yes, we discussed this with the full board and in some other smaller conversations, and we do agree on the self-sufficiency standard, because when you look currently at different pathways for families to access publicly subsidized seats, we are using different thresholds based upon what are the qualifiers based on the source of funds. So for example, Head Start has a certain qualifier, versus EquiCare, which is our local program, has a different qualifier. Working Parents Assistance has a different qualifier. Pre-K, funded by the state, has a different qualifier, right? And so What we see with all of those is all of them fall under currently what our county views as that self-sufficiency standard. And what that self-sufficiency standard monitors and measures is a family of certain sizes and what they can afford. And so knowing that if families are making under that local self-sufficiency, they probably are struggling to afford childcare. So we would like that to be what we use as our threshold. And even last year and the last few years as we've been working to select parents who are those low-income parents on our board, in implementation, that is how we've determined whether or not those parents qualify. Because the other measurements are also different based upon the source of the program, that we just tried to find what is the unifying variable of how we could or should measure that.
In practice, you've been doing that anyway. And the self-sufficiency standard is going to be higher than some of these other standards because of the cost of living here and what it actually costs. So it's a more inclusive standard in the sense that more people that can't afford it. Okay.
Yes, and we know, we ask Community Action Agency, they will redo it hopefully every 5 or 6 years. So we know there will be time when it will change, and probably in the middle time there might be some challenges because there might be some families who are slightly above it who still cannot afford care, but that's what we'll use as the base.
But still be above the other measures. Councilman Raunas?
No, just at a high level, I agree with that. And, the intent was just to make sure that we had the people who are most disproportionately impacted by the crisis that we find ourselves in have a seat at the table and have their voices heard. But we also have to acknowledge in practical reality, on a good day, it's difficult for these families to just be able to make ends meet, let alone make a meeting. So I do think long-term, and we're not going to discuss it right now, we need to think about creative ways to ensure that we have authentic voices heard formally, but also by other means. And I also think it's awkward to have you all have to determine whether or not someone qualifies, because that's a very deeply personal issue for people and really goes to dignity. And so, but at the end of the day, I think this is a better way of tracking it.
Councilmember Lukey.
So the reason I wanted AMI used, and I totally get what you're saying about the self-sufficiency standard, and I don't disagree. And I know that all of the other different things, again, there's all these different funding sources, and they all use a different percentage of a thing. The thing they're using is typically AMI, correct? Or is it a blend of AMI or self-sufficiency standard?
It's federal poverty line is what is used more frequently in most of our measurements.
Okay. And so, because AMI is updated more frequently, I thought that would be a better indicator, and using the wording earning no more than an up to 80% of AMI in order to try and capture and give, again, it gives everyone flexibility because it's up to a certain threshold, right? So you have variability in there as to what you would choose to do. So that's why I had asked for AMI in there.
And we did look at AMI, like we sat with the charts and we're trying to figure out, okay, what would be the threshold if we picked AMI, and it was not as clear to us. And it's not a language that is used in this space from pre-K to EquiCare to Head Start. So we just wanted to stay consistent with what.
Yeah, totally makes sense. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that.
Great. Okay. So I think we are in an agreement that the self-sufficiency standard makes sense. And so we will go without objection. We'll go with that. And thank you for doing that pre-work. I'm glad we can tie it to that. I think that's what we should be tying a lot of things to do, like what it actually costs to be here and pay for childcare. So that's great. Next item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now on to the voting status of ex officio members. We're on page 14 of the staff memorandum, item number 9. As you'll recall, there are basically 3 options here. One is to retain the current situation in which all ex officio members of the board have full voting rights. Another option would be the 2 options that council members Lukey and Mink put forward. One would be None of the ex officio members have voting powers. And then the third option would be more of a compromise position of the ex officio members would have voting rights with the exception of the representative from Montgomery County Public Schools and the DHHS representatives. And some just additional context. At Circle 38, you should see the chart that has comparison information about other quasi-governmental entities. I also looked at just other examples throughout the code of ex officio voting rights. I mean, it's really just such a variety. I think it's the policy judgment call of, the committee of what you want it to be. The other thing I just wanted to point out for context is that I know there's been concern about quorums, and the non-voting members would not count towards a quorum, but I also just wanted to point out it's not necessary to make people non-voting in order to address the quorum issue, because the bylaws could be changed to make a lower quorum. You don't have to have, it's a simple majority is what the bylaws currently state. That could be lowered if needed. That would be up to the board, but if they're having difficulty getting a quorum, the solution doesn't need to be make people non-voting. It could be just change the bylaws. Thanks.
All right. Well, this is the last meaty issue here, so let's start with any views from DHHS and COA, and then I'll turn to colleagues for views.
So I think we firmly believe that every person on the board should have a voice, and really looking at equal votes with this board makeup. I think it's important to remember also that public agencies are not outsiders, and so by removing them for having that voice, it does create a barrier there of being inclusive and equitable. We are part of the system. Public agencies, whether that's the public schools, the community college, the county government, we are part of that community just as parents are. And so I think it's important that we are part of that discussion, those determinations, and those votings. We bring critical insights, we bring subject matter expertise, and accountability as well to the table, right? And so I think it's important that from our perspective that every individual on the board has an equal vote to determining what the outcomes are for decisions. I think that by not giving a vote to public agencies, you really you run a risk of creating a gap, right, between what's the recommendation as well as what is the work that's being done in the community. So from our perspective, that's where we are grounded. Now, when looking at the makeup of the board, we are very cognizant that HHS was awarded 3 seats, but historically we've been using 2. We delegated 1, and so we are comfortable with relinquishing 1 seat to having 2 DHHS seats. And so that's really the bottom line from our perspective.
I appreciate that. I mean, and I'm assuming COA has no disagreement in removing the seats from 3 to 2 for DHHS.
No, we're in agreement with that. I think the other point of agreement regarding the board composition was related to the higher education seats.
Right, Shady Grove, right?
Combining, no longer having a designated seat for Montgomery College or a designated seat for Universities of Shady Grove, but instead having a single higher education seat, ensuring that the person who is coming into that seat really has the expertise around the early care and education pathways and helping us to figure out those parts of our strategy connected to the common agenda.
Okay, so just on that, so right now there's 21 board members currently. Mm-hmm. Okay, under this proposal, this would reduce it to 19 before there's any action. Can we agree on that right now? Okay, so without objection, we will agree on what you've already agreed upon to take the board from 21 to 19, with HHS going from 3 to 2 seats and then replacing the individual appointees for the great institutions of University of Shady Grove and Montgomery College to 1 higher education. Great. All right. So we've already made progress, and we right off the bat. All right. So, and then do you want to just talk about the other part, and then I'll turn to colleagues?
Sure. So we had multiple conversations about this and about the board makeup and the voting rights. And I think they were challenging and frankly uncomfortable conversations to have, because I think there are board spans where they believe and fall kind of in the spectrum of how they think this should be set up. So what our former board chair and current board chair suggested was, they said, okay, Kimberly, do a straw poll. Call everybody and talk with everybody one-on-one and gather everybody's individual perspective. And so in doing that, what that straw poll demonstrated was that 68% of board members do not believe that every current board member that currently has a vote should maintain their vote. And so a lot of the feedback and context that I heard was that our board has struggled with power dynamics, and community members are starting to be optimistic that the system is changing for the better, but our board struggles with conversations and decision making. That it was brought up in the original packet of our organizational creation that it is a conflict of interest for government partners to have a vote on the board. It noted with the county attorney that public members of the board owe a fiduciary duty to the government agency that they are from and not to COA. And so if they are serving as a board member, they should also have that fiduciary duty to the Children's Opportunity Alliance. Government board members already have power and control over our budget and funding sources and how we can spend those dollars, and giving them voting rights in addition to that stacks the power in a very top-down way that feels very heavy-handed. So I do think there is some consensus amongst our board members that there is a possibility to shift that dynamic. And
so was there, just not to cut you off, just maybe you're going to get there, was there, of the 68%, did you go, because that sounds like a very general question you asked, should not everyone vote? Was there consensus around who should not have
so then I have that more specific data.
Yeah.
So 33% believe MCPS and DHHS should have 2 votes for each of the 2 individuals appointed to the board. 57% of people believe that OMB should maintain its voting rights. 55% believe that county council should maintain its voting rights, and 72% believe that the new higher education seat should have voting rights. So there wasn't necessarily consensus amongst who should maintain voting rights or not. So I think then when it came to us having a conversation at the executive committee about what is it that Children's Opportunity Alliance puts forward as a recommendation, we really felt more comfortable leaving it up to you guys to decide, because our board, while there is hesitation that we should or could continue in the same way we have been structured, there wasn't clear decision of this is what it should look like.
And the good news, even if we do nothing, we've already reduced the voting by 2 of 2 what would be seen as governmental side. I mean, the schools and the HHS. And the other thing that has weighed on me in this whole process is that the good news is, and I'm hoping this continues, there have not been a lot of split votes. I think 90% of what you've voted on, I think there was maybe one thing that was a split vote.
Yes, in the past 3 years, we've only had 1 split vote. But I think even thinking of the amendments today, right? Like if it's going to start going more to the board, that they've got to decide on some of these different strategic priorities, and if initiative or pilot programs will fall in line with that, we might see more votes and we might see more disagreement, but we'll see.
Fair
right?
point. No, it's a fair point.
I don't know.
Fair point. Let me turn to my colleagues, Co-Chair Albornoz.
Thank you. Boy, lots of thoughts on this. So, and the context I'm coming at this from is that I've served on a lot of these boards in the public capacity when I was in my old job. And so I've seen those dynamics, and I've said this before, but oftentimes it's personalities. And board dynamics change as personalities change. And we have to remember that I understand the power dynamics component, but the context is you all were building this in real time from not scratch, but close to it. And, some of those changes have happened from a personnel standpoint. And I appreciate DHHS's thoughtful willingness to give up one of the seats, because we've acknowledged that one of the people who was designated DHHS person was actually a staff member of the executive branch. So it was, there was just a little bit of lots of layers to that. So I am comfortable with DHHS having 2 seats, particularly because of how complex and how many touch points there are within DHHS in the early childhood and education space. And I am confident that moving forward, and I've seen evidence of this, a lot of it, that things have significantly improved, and there will be disagreements, but overall I have a high degree of confidence that we're going to be able to work through those. I do want to go back, though, to the higher education. So I do acknowledge the interest in having just one representative, but what USG provides and Montgomery College provides are 2 very different things, right? And Montgomery College is deeply engaged, and the work that they're doing in East County is super exciting. And so I don't want to lose that or water that down, but I also want to acknowledge the practical reality that we have to make sure both entities are being fully present. But I'm reluctant to take away the seats from each because they do, and just having consolidated into one, because I think they do both bring unique and important perspectives, provided they're engaging. And I think that's been part of the problem. So not so much for all partners, but just want to get your thoughts a little bit more on the higher education component and better understand why you're thinking just one position.
Yeah, so right now we have someone from Montgomery College who sits on our data advisory group. We've found other ways for them to kind of connect with with different parts of our work. Also the data advisory group, Chris Saxton from University of Shady Grove co-chairs that with Jessica Isufu from Worksource Montgomery. So there are other, and I think our hope is that there are other pathways or ways for us to connect with them. I think they're just, what we also acknowledge, and maybe Jen, you want to speak to this, is that there are other higher education pathways that are supporting the early care and education workforce, and we want to acknowledge and find room to bring in that expertise from Towson to University of Maryland or others. And so wanting to make sure that those are not designated or specific to specific organizations, but really to helping us figure out the broader pathway. And I think it's as wonderful as Chris Saxton is, he's an IT guy, right? So that is who USG chose to appoint to our board. So he doesn't really have the early care and education expertise. And even as we talked with USG about could there be someone who was a better fit, it was really hard to find someone within their organization who had that specific ECE expertise. So Kevin Beverly had conversations with Ann Kadamian about, that and that shift, and they seem to be okay and understanding of it.
Awesome. And I was going to say to Councilmember, we decided that without objection. So if we needed to change it, but I think
I want it better.
No, it's really good. Were you good? Okay. Anyone else want to speak? Okay. So we have before us some options. We've already reduced it by 2, so that would be 19. Do all 19? What's this current makeup of the remaining 19 as far as voting? Let's just so all of them vote. Okay, got it. And so the proposal would, from council members Mink and Lukey, would change it. Could you just restate the proposal so we're clear?
Correct. There were 2 options put forward for the committee's consideration. Option 1, to make all of the ex officio members, which now I guess it would be 7 of them, non-voting.
Right.
Option number 2 would be to make the Montgomery County Public Schools representative and 1 or 2 of the DHHS representatives, just trying to factor in your agreement about reducing the members, would be non-voting. So it'd be kind of, some would be voting, some would be non-voting.
Right.
So I guess you'd still have 5 voting ex officio members, and then of course the option of just leave everybody voting.
Right. Minus the 2 that we've removed. Right.
Correct.
Which are on the government side.
Correct.
of things. So, I'll just say I understand the point of both points, actually, and I'm glad we removed the first two. I am concerned, my whole concern with this is that we are all one team, and we all need to be swimming in the same direction. And if we're not, that's a problem. That being said, there are power imbalances, and I've been in meetings where the people who have the information and who have the pen and who are presenting do have a larger voice, whether they want to or not. It's just the nature of it, and we have to be aware of that. I do think there's other ways to get at that, how you structure meetings, and who's included and how committees are put together, and there's other ways to deal with those power dynamics. But certainly there have been we have done on other committees, made people non-voting to try to address that. So that's certainly a thing as well. What is the makeup? So of the 19 remaining, how many are government and how many are non-government?
So five.
Your mic. Thank you.
I'm
Becky.
sorry.
That's all right.
Oh, wait, no, we had
Of the 19. Yeah, I just want to make sure
Somebody
we're
help
all
me.
clear on that.
phone a friend.
Yeah, so 12 would remain the private non-ex officio members, and now with the amendment to reduce by 2, 7 would be the ex officio members.
Right.
Of the,
So there's 12 private non-government and 7 government. So the private now outweighs the government. So I think that's reasonable in light of where we are. You guys agree? Okay. So then I think we're in agreement of making no changes. And we'll monitor other than the 2 reductions. And then if this is an issue, which I hope it's not, because we're all swimming in the right direction, it's Finding Nemo. We're swimming, we're going. And we're going to, but we can always talk about it at budget or when we're back before the committee. But I'm hopeful that I think this will be a good solution. So we will not take an amendment there. Is there anything else that we need to deal with?
No other outstanding issues then. this
Okay,
item.
so we'll take a vote on Bill 23, is it 2325? As amended. All those in favor, please raise your hand. All right, that is unanimous. Thank you so much to colleagues. Thank you so much to you all. I think we have one other thing. We need to make sure you can still do the job. So as the entity, so let's do that.
All right, this should be a quick item. So in July 2023, in the first work session, the council reviewed the history of the early care and education efforts in the county, the role of the early care and education coordinating entity, and the Montgomery County Children's Opportunity Alliance, or COA, with their compliance with the ECE requirements. And COA was able to present their record as the ECECE from July 2022 to July 2025 as well. We had this item as the last item for today because we want to do it in the context of the 2 bills that the committee just voted on. Minor updates: since the July work session, the COA board has held the executive committee elections for the second time in their creation and incorporation as the ECECE. So we have our new board chair and vice chair, treasurer, and secretary, and that information can be found on page 7. And COA has also released their mandated annual report on October 1st and their updated FY24 fiscal map. And there's additional information on the ECE landscape and decision-making framework on circle page 51 as well. But otherwise, up for the committee's discussion and tentative action is the designation of the body for the ECECE. As discussed last time, for official designation and effective date of the next 3-year designation period, the council would need to revoke the resolution designating the COA as the ECE through December 31st, which the committee did to be able to have these conversations on the bills, and then introduce and act on a resolution to officially designate the chosen nonprofit. And if the executive were to disapprove of that resolution, they'd have 10 days to do so. The council may readopt it with at least 6 affirmative votes. Options that were for consideration were including redesignating the COA as the coordinating entity for the second official 3-year designation period, maintaining the resolution and having COA as the temporary designee until the end of December 31st, or another legislative motion was introduced. And then finally, the third option is to designate a new nonprofit as the coordinating entity, which would require additional review and revisions of the section in the code on the ECECE. Those were the 3 options for consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez-Hernandez. I think without objection, we will designate COA as the entity with enthusiasm and thankfulness for all the work that you have done and will do under your leadership in partnership with the HHS and MCPS and all the partners that care about our youngest children to give them the access they need. Without objection, we're good there. All right, so we'll move all those 3 items to the full council. I do want to take just a brief moment of personal privilege. While we were sitting here, there was a public announcement that my co-chair, Councilmember Alvarez, will be resigning from the council effective December 1. And I just want to say personally to him, as a friend, a brother, and fellow father of 4 children, this will be our last co-chairing together as HHS and Education and Culture, and we've had a good run. We came on the council at the same time, and he served the county for over 20 years in both of his roles, and I know he'll have more to say about his continued service and plans for going forward, but I just want to thank you publicly for your service on this committee, on these joint committees, on your whole time on the council. You focused on making lives better for people, and I know you'll continue to do that, so just wanted to acknowledge that. We love you. Do you want to say anything?
I'll have a lot more to say later, I promise. But just thank you, Chair Jawando, and how appropriate it is that, you know, the last joint committee session was this session. I've seen the origin story of these conversations and what got us here, and I want to channel our colleague and friend, Councilmember Navarro, who is why we are here. And I'm just so proud of how far we've come, and I know we have a long way to go. And in the coming days, I'll be able to announce what's next up for me, which I'm looking forward to being able to announce. But thank you so much. That was very thoughtful.
And we will all have much more to say about Councilmember Alvarez from the dais as a full council, I'm sure. But I know my colleagues agree. So with that, we are adjourned. Thank you so much.